The sun was going down, painting the city in shades of orange and gold. People hurried through the busy streets, heading back to their warm homes and waiting dinners. But on the other side of town, far away from comfort, a young black girl walked, barefoot along a cracked sidewalk. Her clothes were old, her hair tied back loosely, and her stomach growled with hunger. She clutched a small cloth bag in her hands. Inside it, there was nothing but a few crumbs of bread she had saved from the previous day, yet her eyes carried something stronger than hunger. Determination. She had heard stories about a mansion at the end of the street, a place that belonged to a man so rich that even his leftovers were enough to feed many. This man was not just rich, he was a millionaire, but he was also known for his bitterness. Years ago, he had been in an accident that left him paralyzed, unable to walk. Since then, he had locked himself away in his grand house, surrounded by expensive things, but empty of warmth. He was served by staff who obeyed his orders, but no one dared to challenge his mood. People whispered that he laughed at the poor and turned away anyone who begged at his gates. Still, the girl didn't stop. She reached the high iron gates of the mansion and stood in front of them. The gates were taller than her, decorated with golden designs and guarded by two men in suits. They looked down at her with raised eyebrows, confused at first, then amused. "What do you want here?" one of them asked, his tone sharp. The girl lifted her chin. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I need to speak to the master of this house." The guards burst into laughter. "You speak to him? Do you know who lives here?" "Yes," she answered. "A millionaire. I need to speak with him." The guards shook their heads. "Go away, little girl. He doesn't meet people like you." But she didn't move. She held onto the bars of the gate and repeated, "Please, tell him I have a proposal." "A trade?" The guards exchanged glances, now curious. "A trade? What could you possibly trade? You don't have anything." The girl's eyes shone with quiet strength. "I will trade his leftovers for a wonder." The guards stared at her, then burst out laughing again. "Leftovers for a wonder? What nonsense is this?" One of them waved her away. "Run along before you cause trouble." But the girl didn't leave. She stood firm, her thin arms clutching the bag at her side. Hours seemed to pass as she waited. The guards grew annoyed, but they also realized she wasn't giving up. Finally, one of them sighed and muttered, "Fine, let's see what happens if we take this foolish child inside. Maybe the boss will have a laugh." They led her through the gates and up the long stone path. The mansion rose before her, enormous and bright, with marble steps leading up to heavy double doors. The walls were covered in shining glass windows, each one taller than her. It was the kind of place she had only seen from far away, a world. Too rich for someone like her? Inside, the floors sparkled with polished stone, and golden chandeliers hung from the ceiling. The girl walked slowly, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. The guards took her into a wide living room, where the millionaire sat in a large leather chair, his wheelchair positioned by the tall window. He wore an expensive suit, his face pale but sharp, his eyes cold. When he saw her, he raised an eyebrow. "What is this?" His voice was deep, irritated. The guard bowed slightly. "Sir, this girl insisted on seeing you. She says she has a trade to offer." The millionaire laughed harshly. "A trade? With me? And what does she have to offer? Look at her. She has nothing." The girl stepped forward, her small hands clutching the bag tighter. "I ask for your leftovers," she said softly, but without fear. "In return, I will give you something better. A wonder." The room went silent for a moment. The guards exchanged looks, barely able to hold in their laughter. The assistants standing in the corner covered their mouths, whispering. The millionaire stared at her, then suddenly burst out laughing. His laughter filled the entire room, mocking, cruel. "You," he said between laughs, "you want my leftovers? And in exchange, you'll give me a wonder." Do you think I am a fool? The girl didn't flinch. Her voice stayed calm. I keep my promises. The millionaire chuckled again, shaking his head. Fine. Let's see this so-called wonder of yours. But don't say I didn't warn you. People like you usually end up disappointing everyone. The guards smirked, the assistants whispered, and the millionaire leaned back in his chair, amused. To him, this was just entertainment, a poor girl with wild ideas. But to her, it was the start of something far greater. She stood tall in the room, small against the shining walls, yet unshaken. Everyone thought she was a fool. But deep down, she knew her wonder was real, and soon they would all see it. The millionaire sat in his wide chair, his cold eyes fixed on the girl standing before him. He had met countless business people, lawyers, and wealthy investors in his life, but never someone like her. A thin, poor child with nothing in her hands except an old bag, and yet she stood there speaking about trades and wonders, as if she belonged in the same world as him. The room was heavy with laughter from his staff. One assistant leaned closer to another and whispered, "This girl is crazy." The guards smirked, arms crossed, ready to throw her out at the first order, but the girl wasn't afraid. Her chin was lifted, her voice steady. She repeated her request clearly. "I only want what you throw away, the food you don't finish. That is all." The millionaire tilted his head, studying her. He was used to beggars asking for money or food, but none had ever spoken like this. They usually cried, pleaded, or lowered themselves in shame, but this one, she dared to look him in the eye and call it a trade, as if she was his equal. "And what will you give me in return?" he asked finally, his voice sharp. "A wonder," she replied simply. That word echoed through the room like a spark in the dark. Some laughed again, others rolled their eyes. One guard muttered, "She's mad, throw her out." But the millionaire lifted a hand, stopping them. His lips curled into a smile. "A wonder, you say? Tell me, child, what kind of wonder can a girl like you possibly offer me?" The girl's face softened, but she didn't back down. "Not one you can buy with. Money, a wonder that only comes when you give." Her words caught him off guard. For a moment the millionaire's smile faded, but then he chuckled again, dismissing it. "So this is what you offer me, mystery words and riddles." He leaned back in his chair and gestured toward the dining table nearby. It was covered in half-eaten dishes, silver trays piled with untouched bread, roasted meat left cooling, fruits already losing their shine. "Take it," he said with a smirk. "Take my scraps, since you call it a trade. Let us see what miracle you can pull out of trash." The staff laughed harder. One of them even clapped mockingly. "Yes, child, show us your wonder." The girl walked to the table slowly. She opened her small cloth bag and piece by piece began gathering the leftovers. Bread, rice, vegetables, even fruit that had been cut but ignored. She moved carefully, as if every crumb mattered. The staff watched with amusement, whispering about how pitiful she looked. But the millionaire kept watching in silence. Something about the way she collected the food, with care and dignity, unsettled him. Most beggars would have grabbed greedily, stuffing as much as possible into their hands, but she moved like someone on a mission, as if even scraps carried value. When she finished, she tied the bag tightly and turned back to him. She bowed her head politely. "Thank you. I will return." The staff burst out laughing again. "Return? What for?" One said, "You'll be gone after one meal," but the girl didn't respond to them. She looked directly at the millionaire, her eyes steady. "You will see what I mean," she said softly. The millionaire raised his brows, still amused. "Very. Well," he said, "go then. I'll be waiting for this wonder you speak of." The guards opened the doors, still chuckling, and the girl walked out quietly, her bag full of food hanging from her hand. She didn't look back, didn't react to the laughter behind her. Her steps were steady, almost too steady for someone who was supposedly just a beggar. When the doors shut, silence fell in the mansion. One assistant finally asked, "Why did you humor her, sir? She's just a child. She has nothing to offer." The millionaire stared at the door for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled faintly. "Because she dared." The staff exchanged confused looks. The man who mocked the world had just admitted to being intrigued. Later that night, as the house grew quiet, the millionaire found himself restless. He replayed the encounter in his mind. The girl's calm eyes, her steady voice, her bold promise. She hadn't begged him like others. She had challenged him, in her own way. And he, a man with more money than he could ever spend, suddenly realized he was waiting to see if she truly would return with something he didn't expect. He laughed bitterly to himself, shaking his head. "A wonder," she says. "Let us see." Outside the mansion, the girl walked down the dark streets, her bag heavy with leftovers. Children peeked out from the corners, their faces thin, their eyes wide with hunger. She knelt down, smiling softly, and opened the bag. One by one, she began handing out the food. Bread to a boy with torn shoes, meat to a mother holding her baby, fruit to an old man sitting alone. The scraps the millionaire had mocked now filled empty stomachs, bringing smiles to faces that hadn't smiled in days. To them, it wasn't trash. It was hope. The girl's heart warmed as she watched them eat. She whispered to herself, "This is the wonder he will never understand until he sees it with his own eyes," and she promised silently, as she looked at the hungry crowd, that she would go back again, not for herself, but for them, and maybe, just maybe, to teach the man. Behind those gates, a lesson he didn't know he needed. The next evening, the mansion glowed once again with light. Inside, the dining table was filled with dishes too rich for most people to even dream of. Steaming soups, roasted meats, creamy sauces, bread so fresh it still smelled of the oven. Yet, like always, much of it went untouched. The millionaire ate slowly from his wheelchair, surrounded by staff who served him with perfect timing. But his mind wasn't fully on the food. He kept glancing toward the door, though he didn't admit it. He didn't know why, but he half expected the little girl to return. He told himself it was just curiosity, nothing more. A girl like her couldn't really have anything to teach him. Still, he waited. And then, as the clock struck 8, the doors opened. The same girl walked in, her old bag hanging by her side. She bowed politely and said, "I have come again." The staff exchanged looks of disbelief. Some shook their heads, muttering. One guard whispered, "She's back? Does she not have shame?" The millionaire chuckled, his lips curving into a mocking smile. "Ah, the trader of wonders returns. Tell me, girl, did my scraps make you a queen overnight?" The staff laughed, their voices echoing in the grand hall. One assistant sneered, "Maybe she sold the leftovers for pennies on the street." Another added, "Or perhaps she ate it all herself and now wants more." But the girl's face stayed calm. She neither defended herself nor argued. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly and said, "I came to trade again. Your leftovers, in exchange for another wonder." The laughter grew louder. The guards doubled over, holding their stomachs, unable to believe her boldness. To them, she was only a poor child playing with big words. The millionaire raised his hand to quiet them. His eyes, sharp but curious, stayed fixed on her. "So you want more scraps?" he said slowly. "And what will you give me this time? Another riddle?" Her voice was steady, her words clear. "The same as before. I will take what you throw away and turn it into something you cannot buy." His laughter shook the room. "You speak as if you are a magician. Very well then, take it. But understand, child, this is still trash. Trash cannot become treasure." The staff clapped mockingly, treating it like a performance. They shoved trays toward her, piling bread and rice and vegetables into her bag, laughing as they did. One even whispered loud enough for her to hear, "There goes the little beggar, carrying our trash like it's gold." But the girl didn't react. She collected everything carefully, tying the bag tight as before. Then she bowed once more, her expression calm, almost too calm for someone being ridiculed. "Thank you," she said softly. "One day you will see." Her words, though quiet, carried across the room like a challenge. The millionaire smirked but said nothing more. He waved his hand dismissively, and the guards escorted her out. As soon as the doors closed behind her, the staff burst into laughter again. "She is mad," one shouted. "A wonder from garbage." Another added, "She thinks she's clever, but she's just a beggar with strange words." The millionaire chuckled too, but the sound was emptier than before. Something about her, steady eyes and calm voice, stayed in his mind. He told himself it was foolish, but deep inside he felt a strange pull, a need to know what she was doing with the food. Later that night, his curiosity won. He called one of his assistants. "Follow her," he ordered. "See where she takes the scraps." The assistant nodded and slipped out into the night. Meanwhile, the girl walked through the cold streets with her heavy bag. The moon was high, and the alleys were filled with shadows. But in the corners of those shadows, eyes watched her, hungry. Children, old men, and mothers holding crying babies. She stopped in front of the same shelter she had gone to the night before. It was nothing more than a broken-down building with a leaking roof, but inside it were people who needed her. She opened the bag and began handing out food. One by one, faces lit up. A boy who hadn't eaten in 2 days bit into a piece of bread with tears in his eyes. An elderly woman whispered prayers of thanks as she held warm rice in her hands. A mother smiled weakly as she fed her baby soft fruit. To them, it wasn't trash, it was life. The assistant hiding in the shadows watched all of this, frozen. He had expected her to sell the food, maybe even eat it all herself, but instead she gave away everything, keeping nothing for her own empty stomach. She even smiled as she did it, her eyes glowing with kindness. When the assistant returned to the mansion and reported what he had seen, the staff fell silent. The millionaire listened without expression, his fingers tapping against the armrest of his chair. "So," he said slowly, "the girl takes what I waste and feeds others." The assistant nodded. "Yes, sir. Every bite went to someone in need." For the first time, the millionaire didn't laugh. He didn't mock. He only sat, quietly staring out the window at the dark night. Something inside him shifted, something he hadn't felt in years. He couldn't name it yet, but it unsettled him more than anything. The girl had returned his leftovers, not with gold or jewels, but with something far stranger. She had turned trash into hope. And though he would never admit it aloud, it frightened him because deep down, he wondered if that was the real wonder she had promised. The next morning, the mansion buzzed with whispers. The assistant who had followed the girl had told everyone what he saw. How she gave away every crumb of food to the hungry, how she smiled while others ate, how she didn't keep a single bite for herself. The story spread quickly through the halls, from the guards at the gate to the cooks in the kitchen. Some servants shook their heads in disbelief. "She's just a child. Why would she give away food when she herself is starving?" Others whispered with a hint of respect. "Maybe that's her secret. She doesn't think about herself. She thinks about others." By the time the news reached the millionaire, he sat in silence, his face unreadable. His staff expected him to laugh, to call it foolishness again. But he didn't. Instead, he simply said, "Bring her back tonight. I want to see with my own eyes." That evening, as the golden chandeliers lit up the dining hall, the girl appeared once more. Her steps were slow but steady, her old bag hanging at her side. She bowed politely, her eyes calm, as always. The millionaire leaned forward in his chair. "So," he said, his voice sharp but quieter than before, "my assistant tells me you fed the hungry with my scraps." The girl nodded. "Yes, and I will do it again." The staff waited for the explosion of laughter, the mocking words they were used to hearing from their master. But this time, none came. The millionaire only narrowed his eyes. "You gave away Everything, not a single piece for yourself. I know hunger, she said softly. I can endure it, but some cannot. Her words cut through the air like a blade. For the first time in years, the millionaire felt something stir in his chest. A memory. He remembered the days after his accident, lying helpless in a hospital bed. Everyone thought of his wealth, his power, but few cared about his pain. He knew what it was like to feel invisible, and now this child was choosing to see those whom the world ignored. The staff didn't understand the silence. They fidgeted, glancing at one another nervously. Finally, the millionaire broke it with a sharp laugh, though it sounded weaker than before. So, this is your great wonder? Feeding beggars with scraps? The girl met his eyes steadily. It is not scraps to them. It is life. Her voice was so calm, so certain, that for a moment no one dared to laugh. The millionaire leaned back, shaking his head, trying to dismiss the unease inside him. Very well, take more. Let us see how long your miracle lasts. The cooks brought out trays of food again, setting them down with exaggerated gestures. The staff smirked, expecting her to look greedy, to snatch at the food, but as always, she moved with quiet dignity, packing each item carefully into her bag. When she finished, she bowed respectfully and turned to leave. This time, however, the millionaire spoke. Wait. The girl stopped, turning back to him with questioning eyes. He gestured toward one of the guards. Follow her again. I want proof. The guard nodded and left quickly, trailing behind her into the night. Outside, the city streets were colder than before. The wind bit against her thin clothes, but she didn't slow down. She walked the same path, through the alleys and broken neighborhoods, until she reached the shelter. Children ran to her with shining eyes, already recognizing her. She's back! She's back! They cried. She opened the bag and began to hand out food, just like before. Bread went to the children, rice to the old women, fruit to the sick. The shelter filled with laughter, with sighs of relief, with prayers whispered into the air. The guard, hiding in the shadows, watched in silence. He had expected to see the same as the night before. But this time, something struck him differently. He saw the way the children hugged her, how the old men blessed her, how mothers cried as they fed their babies. He realized it wasn't just food she was giving. She was giving hope. When he returned to the mansion and reported everything, the staff listened with wide eyes. Some still shook their heads, unwilling to admit anything special about her. But others fell silent, their thoughts troubled. Team Millionaire listened carefully, his face hidden in shadow. After a long silence, he spoke in a low voice. So, it is true, she gives away everything. Yes, sir, the guard confirmed, and they adore her for it. The millionaire turned his wheelchair toward the window, staring out at the night. For years, he had thought his wealth made him powerful, yet here was a child with nothing who gave away what he threw out, and somehow she seemed richer than him. He clenched the armrest of his chair, unsettled. Tomorrow, he muttered, tomorrow she will come again, and I will see for myself. The staff exchanged nervous glances. Their master's tone had changed. It wasn't mockery anymore. It was something else. Curiosity, maybe even respect. Meanwhile, outside in the cold night, the girl walked home empty-handed once again. Her stomach ached with hunger, but her heart was light. She knew the millionaire still didn't understand, but she also knew. Each time she returned, the seed of change grew stronger inside him, and soon the first signs of her true wonder would begin to show. The mansion was unusually tense the next evening. The staff moved quietly, whispering among themselves. Some laughed nervously, still mocking the girl, but others spoke in hushed voices, wondering why their master had not dismissed her yet. The paralyzed millionaire, once known for cruel jokes, had shown something unexpected: curiosity. He sat in his grand chair, his sharp eyes fixed on the clock. For the first time in years, he was waiting for someone who wasn't a business partner, a lawyer or a doctor. He was waiting for a poor little girl. When the clock struck 8, the heavy doors opened. There she was again. The girl entered the mansion slowly, her small bag hanging from her arm. She bowed politely as if stepping into a temple, not a rich man's home. The millionaire's lips curved into a smirk. "Back again? Do you never tire of begging for scraps?" "I do not beg," the girl replied calmly. "I trade. I give you a wonder in return." The room went silent. Her voice, though soft, carried a strange weight. The staff couldn't hold their laughter any longer. One of them scoffed loudly. "A wonder? What wonder? She only carries trash to the streets." Another added, "She feeds beggars and calls it magic." Foolish child. But the millionaire didn't laugh this time. Instead, he raised his hand, silencing them. His eyes narrowed at the girl. "You keep saying this word, wonder. Show me then. Where is it?" The girl looked at him steadily. "It is already there, though you do not see it. The food you call trash becomes joy, becomes hope, becomes life for those who need it most. That is the wonder." The words struck him harder than he expected. For a long moment, he sat in silence, staring at her. His staff shifted uneasily, not used to seeing their master speechless. Then, with a bitter laugh, he waved his hand. "Take it again, then. Take what I waste, and let us see how long your miracle lasts before it fades." The servants brought trays of uneaten food. Golden loaves of bread, steaming bowls of rice, roasted chicken and sweet fruits, all untouched by the wealthy master who had lost his appetite for life. They dropped the food onto the table carelessly, as though it had no meaning. The girl stepped forward and began collecting it piece by piece, her movements gentle, her face calm. She placed each item into her bag carefully, as if it were treasure. The staff smirked and whispered, but none dared to speak too loudly. When she finished, she tied the bag and bowed once again. But this time, before she could leave, the millionaire raised his voice. "Wait," she turned, her eyes questioning. He leaned forward slightly in his wheelchair, his voice firm. "Tonight I will see with my own eyes. Take me there." Gasps filled the room. The staff looked shocked. "Sir, you cannot. It is dangerous in those streets," one protested, but the millionaire's face hardened. "I said I will see it myself. Prepare the car." And so, for the first time in years, the paralyzed millionaire left his golden mansion. The staff carried him to a sleek black car, and the girl climbed in quietly with her bag of food. The ride through the city was long, moving from bright neighborhoods into darker streets, where cracked buildings leaned against one another, and the air smelled of smoke and hunger. The millionaire watched through the window, his face unreadable. He had not seen these streets in years. To him, the city had always been tall glass towers and shining lights. But now he saw children with hollow cheeks, mothers clutching babies wrapped in rags, old men sitting in alleys with empty eyes. The car stopped near the broken shelter where the girl always went. She stepped out and walked quickly, her bag heavy with food. Curious, the millionaire ordered his staff to follow behind, pushing his wheelchair close enough to see. And then he saw it. The children ran to her first, their voices bright with joy. "She's here! She's here!" they cried. Their faces lit up as she opened the bag. She handed out bread, rice, and fruit, her eyes warm, her smile soft. Mothers whispered blessings, old men pressed their hands together in gratitude, and children laughed with their mouths full. The millionaire's breath caught in his throat. The same food he had dismissed as trash was now a feast, filling empty stomachs, bringing laughter where there had been silence. The scraps he had mocked were saving lives. One little boy tugged at the girl's hand and said, "You're an angel." She smiled at him and shook her head. "No, I am just someone who knows hunger." The millionaire's eyes stung, though he quickly blinked the feeling away. For years he had surrounded himself with riches, but he had never seen joy like this. Pure, simple joy born out of kindness. The staff behind him shifted awkwardly, ashamed of how they had mocked her. They could see it too. What she was doing was no small thing. It was extraordinary. The millionaire turned his chair back toward the car, his face pale and thoughtful. "Enough," he said quietly. "Take me home." The girl bowed to him as he left, but he didn't speak another word. His heart was heavy, his mind unsettled. For the first time in years he felt something he thought he had lost: shame. Back at the mansion, he sat in silence long after everyone else had gone to sleep. Her words echoed in his head. The food you call trash becomes joy, becomes hope, becomes life. For the first time, he wondered if she was right. Maybe the real wonder wasn't gold or money or power. Maybe the real wonder was in giving. The mansion was strangely quiet the following day. The staff tiptoed around, whispering about what had happened the night before. None of them had ever seen their master leave the mansion, let alone follow a poor girl into the dark streets, and none could forget the look on his face as he watched her hand out scraps to the hungry. The paralyzed millionaire stayed in his room most of the morning, not speaking to anyone. He sat by the tall window, staring out at the city skyline. His eyes were heavy with thought. He had lived his life surrounded by money, power, and things that most people could only dream of. Yet he could not escape the image of children's faces lighting up over food he had once called trash. That evening, the girl returned as promised. She entered the mansion with the same calm steps, her old bag hanging at her side. She bowed politely and stood before him. For once, the staff didn't laugh. They stood silently in the corners, waiting. Even they sensed the shift. The millionaire looked at her for a long moment before speaking. His voice was low, but there was no mockery this time. "Why do you do it? Why give everything away when you have nothing for yourself?" The girl lifted her eyes, steady and calm. "Because I know what it feels like to be hungry, and I know what it feels like to be invisible." Her words struck him like a stone to the chest. He leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Invisible?" he repeated. "Yes," she said softly. "The world passes by people like me, like those in the shelter. They don't see us. But when someone gives, even scraps, they remind us that we exist, that we matter." The room fell silent. Even the guards shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her eyes. The millionaire's jaw tightened. He looked away, his fingers gripping the armrest of his wheelchair. "Do you think I don't know what it feels like?" he said bitterly. The girl tilted her head slightly. "Do you?" His voice cracked with a rare honesty. "When the accident happened, I lost everything. My legs, my freedom, my pride. People stopped looking at me as a man. They only saw a cripple in a chair, or worse, they saw my money, not me. Yes, child, I know what it is like to be invisible." The words hung heavy in the air. "For the first time." The staff looked at their master with something close to pity. The girl nodded slowly. "Then you understand why I do it." The millionaire turned back to her, his eyes burning. "But why you? Why not keep it for yourself? Why not save your own hunger first?" She smiled faintly. "Because if I eat, only one stomach is full. But if I share, many hearts are full. And when they smile, I forget my hunger." The staff gasped softly, moved despite themselves. The millionaire stared at her, silent. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was foolish. But deep down, he knew she spoke a truth he had never dared to see. All his wealth had never brought him peace, yet here was a child, poor and hungry, who spoke like she carried the world's greatest treasure. Greatest treasure. Finally, he asked, "And what do you gain from it? What is your reward?" The girl's eyes softened. "Their joy is my reward. That is the wonder I promised you. Not gold, not jewels, but something your money cannot buy." The room was still. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. The millionaire's fingers trembled against his chair. For the first time in many years, he felt his cold heart begin to thaw. He leaned forward, his voice quieter now. "And if I gave more? Not just scraps, but meals. Would you still give it away?" She nodded. "Yes, I would give until no one is left hungry." The staff stared at her in awe. To them, she was no longer just a poor girl. She was something more, something pure, something unbreakable. The millionaire sat back, his mind heavy. He had spent years laughing at the poor, mocking their struggles, feeding his bitterness with cruelty. Yet here stood a child who gave without asking for anything in return. She had nothing, but she lived as if she had everything. For the first time in years, he did not laugh. Instead, he whispered almost to himself, "Maybe you are right. Maybe the true wonder is not what I keep, but what I give." The girl bowed her head respectfully. "Now you begin to see." That night, after she left, the mansion was filled with silence. The staff didn't whisper jokes anymore. They moved, quietly thoughtful, replaying her words in their minds. And in his room, the paralyzed millionaire lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her words echoed in his head, louder than any voice he had heard in years. "If I eat, only one stomach is full. But if I share, many hearts are full." For the first time, he wondered if his wealth, his endless piles of gold, his untouched banquets, his high walls, had blinded him to the simplest truth of all. And for the first time, he wished to see that wonder again. The next day, the mansion kitchen prepared another feast as usual. Silver trays overflowed with roasted meats, bread, steaming vegetables, and sweet desserts. But for the first time, the paralyzed millionaire did not look at the food with boredom or bitterness. Instead, he thought of the children's faces, the old men's trembling hands, the mothers' whispering blessings. He remembered how scraps had turned into joy. When the girl arrived that evening, he did not greet her with laughter. His eyes were serious, his voice calm. "Tonight, you will not take scraps. Tonight, you will take full meals." The staff froze, shocked. One of the cooks whispered, "Full meals? For beggars?" Another servant frowned, confused, but the millionaire silenced them with a sharp look. "Prepare them," he ordered. "Pack them well." The kitchen scrambled, unsure but obedient. They filled containers with hot rice, meat, bread, and fruit. They loaded them into large boxes, more than the girl's little bag could ever carry. She stood quietly, watching with steady eyes. Finally, the millionaire turned to her. "Take this," he said, "and tell me, what will you do with it?" She bowed slightly. "What I always do. Share." That evening, the mansion car carried her back to the shelter, the millionaire insisting on following again. His wheelchair was placed inside, and his staff drove through the city. This time he did not stare in silence. He asked questions. "Do they always wait for you?" "Yes," she replied, "because they know I will come." "Why trust you?" "Because I never fail them." The car stopped, and once again the hungry ran to greet her. But this time she did not only carry scraps, she carried full meals. She opened the boxes, and the crowd gasped. Fresh bread, warm rice, sweet fruit. It was more than they had ever seen. The children laughed and clapped, their hands full of food. Mothers cried with relief. Old men sat straighter, their voices filled with thanks. It was not just feeding now, it was a feast. The millionaire watched from his chair, his eyes wide. His chest tightened as he saw joy spreading like fire through the shelter. He had never seen such gratitude, never seen people so alive over something he had always taken for granted. One boy ran up to him, his mouth full of bread. "Thank you!" the boy shouted with a grin. "Thank you, sir!" The words hit him harder than he expected. He had been thanked for donations before, for funding projects, for signing checks. But this was different. This was personal, direct, real. He looked down, his hands trembling slightly. For years he had seen his wealth as useless, as nothing more than numbers. But tonight he saw it transform into laughter, smiles, and life. The girl moved through the crowd gracefully, handing food to everyone. Her eyes shone, her smile soft. She gave to all, keeping nothing for herself. The millionaire noticed and frowned. "You are hungry too," he said. "Why do you not eat?" She looked at him gently. "Because joy fills me more than food." His throat tightened. He turned away quickly, not wanting anyone to see the shine in his eyes. On the way back to the mansion, the car was silent. But inside the millionaire's heart, something heavy was lifting. He realized he did not feel bitter that night. He did not feel empty. For the first time in years, he felt useful, needed, alive. When they reached the mansion, he called his staff together. His voice was firm, commanding, but not cruel. "From today onward, no food will be thrown away. Everything will be prepared, packed and sent to the shelters. This house will waste nothing." The staff looked shocked, but nodded. They had never heard their master speak this way. He turned to the girl. "You will guide this. Tell me where it must go. Tell me who needs it most. From today, you are not a beggar. You are my partner." The girl's eyes softened with gratitude. She bowed deeply. "Then tonight," she said, "you have taken the first step toward your wonder." The staff exchanged glances. Some still didn't understand, but others were beginning to see. Their master, once cold and cruel, was changing before their eyes. In the days that followed, the mansion transformed. Each evening, boxes of food left the golden gates. Each night, the girl delivered them with joy, and the millionaire often followed, in his car to watch. The shelters grew louder with laughter, the streets brighter with hope, and slowly the whispers spread beyond the neighborhood. "The paralyzed millionaire is feeding the poor." At first, people thought it was a joke, but then they saw the truth. His name, once spoken with bitterness, was now spoken with gratitude. Inside his own heart, the millionaire felt something he had not felt in years: purpose. His body might have been broken, but his spirit was waking again. And every time he saw the girl hand out food, he remembered what she had promised him: a wonder. Now, he finally began to believe it. Weeks passed, and the mansion no longer felt the same. The golden chandeliers still sparkled, the marble floors still shone, but the atmosphere had changed. Every evening, instead of tossing away leftovers, the kitchen carefully prepared meals to be packed and delivered. What was once waste had become life. The paralyzed millionaire, who once sat bitter and cold, now spent his evenings watching the change unfold. At first, he had gone to the shelters out of curiosity. Now he went because he wanted to feel the warmth of those moments, the smiles, the blessings, the laughter that rose from empty bellies being filled. One night, as the girl handed out food, a young boy tugged on the millionaire's sleeve. "Sir," the boy said, his small voice trembling with gratitude, "you saved us. You gave us hope." The millionaire swallowed hard, his throat tight. He had been called many names before: powerful, ruthless, rich, but never hope. When he returned to the mansion that night, he sat silently in his room. His mind replayed the boy's words again and again. For the first time in years, he felt tears sting his eyes. He quickly wiped them away, but the feeling remained. The next evening, when the girl arrived, he asked her to stay after the food was packed. She stood before him patiently, her calm eyes steady as always. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You promised me a wonder. I mocked you. I laughed at you. But now I think I finally see it." The girl tilted her head gently. "And what do you see?" His voice shook slightly as he replied, "I see that the real wonder is not in gold or mansions or banquets. It is in kindness, in giving. You took what I saw as worthless and turned it into something priceless. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." "And what is that?" she asked softly. He lowered his gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. "Purpose." The staff standing nearby froze, their hearts struck by the honesty in his words. This was not the man they once knew. The cruel laughter, the arrogance, the bitterness, all of it had melted away. The girl smiled gently. Then my trade was fair. Your scraps for your purpose. For the first time in years, the millionaire laughed. Not a cruel, mocking laugh, but a warm, genuine one. The sound echoed through the grand halls, surprising everyone. It was as if the mansion itself breathed again. From that day forward, the millionaire changed not just his home, but his life. He began funding shelters across the city, building kitchens, and supporting families who had nothing. But he did not do it alone. The girl was always by his side, guiding him, reminding him of the faces that truly needed help. He no longer called her a beggar. He called her his teacher. The world outside soon noticed. Newspapers wrote stories of the cold millionaire who found his heart. People who once despised his arrogance now admired his generosity. But for him, it wasn't about reputation. It wasn't about headlines. It was about the quiet joy he saw in the shelters, the smiles that came from simple meals, the peace he felt in his own heart. One evening he turned to the girl as they watched children laughing over plates of food. "You gave me more than a wonder," he said. "You gave me back myself." The girl shook her head, gently. "No, you always had it inside you. You just needed to see." Her words stayed with him long after, and whenever doubt crept into his heart, he remembered them. The staff, too, changed. The same people who once laughed at the girl now carried boxes with pride, knowing they were part of something meaningful. They treated her with respect, no longer mocking but listening, learning from her quiet strength. Years later, people would tell the story of the paralyzed millionaire who was transformed by a poor girl's courage. They would speak of the night. She walked into his mansion with nothing but a bag and a bold promise. They would speak of how she turned his scraps into wonders that no money could buy, and in the heart of every retelling, one truth remained clear. The richest man in the city had thought he had everything, until a poor girl showed him he had nothing. Without compassion, and the poorest girl had thought she had nothing, until her courage revealed she had the greatest gift of all, the power to change hearts. That was the true wonder. It was not magic. It was not a miracle in the sky. It was the simple act of giving, the courage to care, the strength to see value where others saw waste. The night she first stood at his gates, everyone thought she was foolish. But in the end, she had silenced not just the mansion, not just the staff, but the entire city, by proving that even the smallest kindness can create the greatest wonders. And the millionaire, once trapped in bitterness, now lived not as a man defined by his wealth, but as one defined by his compassion. For the rest of his life, he never forgot the girl's words. "If I eat, only one stomach is full, but if I share, many hearts are full." That was the wonder. That was the miracle.